So I guess we'll go ahead and get started. And first, I just want to welcome everybody and thank you all for making the time to participate and engage with us as we work on how RDA can align with the Sustainable Development Goals. This has been an ongoing project since Botswana and before. I saw Lindsay give a presentation and it was fantastic, and just kind of how could we hit the ground running on this. We organized a panel in Philadelphia surrounding the Sustainable Development Goals and how we could focus on that and start aligning that. And Devika and Ingo have been incredibly helpful, as well as Ida and a number of different people across the RDA organization. And it's been really, really a pleasure getting to this point. And I'm so excited to see how we can continue growing this effort, and really just thank you all for engaging with us and making the time to join us. We have a number of topics to cover today. Edith will speak from the council perspective and offer an introduction on some new council updates surrounding the alignment of RDA and the Sustainable Development Goals. I'll provide a bit of background on some alignment with outputs and RDA activities mapped against the Berkman-Klein model that could aid in supporting the Sustainable Development Goals and some of the National Statistical Office's practices and data management issues surrounding there. And then Ingvild will speak about some mapping of organizational activities from RDA interest groups and working groups. And then we'll hear from really some boots on the ground perspective of a number of people that are doing this work within their own field and their own disciplines, and really kind of demonstrate how this work really gets done and how it really aligns both within the RDA and outside the RDA. And we thank all of them and everybody for joining. We'll have some time for question and answer after each of the presentations, but really we want to leave a big chunk of discussion, at least about half an hour at the end. So while we could have some brief question and answer after each presentation, really we really want to make and capitalize on the time that you all are offering to participate here. So we want to leave a chunk at the end to really have some question and answer about next steps, and where everybody sees their alignment and where they can kind of hit the ground running on their own activities. So keep that in mind as you might have questions. We'll all be monitoring the chat throughout, of course. And then there's also the shared Google Doc that was in the invitation and on the plenary slide. So we'll be taking notes there as well. And as always, raise hands and chat if you have questions. And I think at that point, I'll go ahead and pass it off to Edith so that she can kind of provide an introduction.
Anthony?
Yes.
Excuse me. If you can stick the link to the shared notes here in the chat, maybe it helps.
Yes,
others.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'll drop that in there. And then, thank you, Francois. So I think Francois beat me to it. So thank you. We've got the collaborative notes. Thank you so much, Francois. So everybody can access that. Good deal. Yep. And maybe if you don't mind, if you can access that, go ahead and write your name in the attendee list at the bottom. So I'll go ahead and start a section for attendees. And then if you could add your name and maybe institution or contact email so that we can all follow up and kind of keep everybody in the loop. That would be exceptionally helpful just to keep everybody together. That would be really, really helpful. So I think there's...
Anthony, just a question that will you share in the slides, please? They're wonderful.
Oh, yes. Do you have, so do you have share screen privileges? You should, if you...
I can share it, no
yes,
problem.
Yeah.
But maybe it's not in the...
Can they see it?
Can you see it, or should I change to the...
No, I can see it. Can everybody else?
Okay. So you can, good.
Yes.
So good afternoon, good morning, good evening for everyone. My name is Edith Herzog, and I'm one of the 3 European Council members within the RDA. I have a bit different CV from most of the RDA members because I'm a former politician. I was 10 years member of the European Parliament. And actually, I did work a lot in my parliamentary terms with both the development aid and the corporate social responsibility with the Millennium Goals, which finally converged into the Sustainable Development Goals in 2016. And I'm very pleased to be in the RDA. But actually, when I went to RDA first time, I thought that RDA is already working on the Sustainable Development Goals. And I am very pleased that now we are getting close to do it, because now with the interest group and with the new strategy of the council, which is in the pipeline, we hopefully will move. And I'd like to introduce to this interest group, which I have to establish as well, together with Ingvild and many others, Francoise and Anthony. So I'd like to introduce you where the council stays with its preparation to be SDG proven organization for the future for RDA, and what do we think about this? So the RDA mission, which we all know, the RDA vision and the mission is very much about to building social technical bridges to enable open sharing and address the grand challenges of the society. So it's in large connected and similar to the Sustainable Development Goals mission as well. And RDA in this new strategy try to focus on the three major areas: the people, processes, and the products.
Edith,
and, yes,
Edith, this is Ingrid. Maybe you should advance your slides because I think you're talking about the second slide.
Which one you see, the RDA mission?
No, we see the title slide.
Oops, sorry. I don't know. Yeah, because I see something else. Yeah, so sorry. Still?
Now we see your presenter view instead of full screen view.
One moment. On screen. Can you see it now?
Good.
Okay. So you see on that space the RDA mission, vision, and the strategic directions, so which we wish to take. And RDA has nearly 100 working groups and interest groups, which are connected to the SDGs, some of them more directly than others. But the connection is often not recognized or articulated for the outside world. And therefore, we are not visible for other communities outside of RDA who are working on the RDAs and who could use our solutions and our outputs. So I think it was absolutely the time to go. Also, as one of the council members recently reminded me, that RDA supports the open science transition and therefore the SDGs, because the open science transition is about opening and sharing the data, and again, adding to any of the sustainable development goals. So RDA already does it, but it's not necessarily seen, neither for the members, neither for the outside communities. And now my slide, it doesn't move again. Sorry.
If you like, I can pull up. There you go.
Yeah, here we go.
Okay.
Yeah, so just to remind us that what are the UN development goals, the 17 SDG targets with the 169 indicators, which we are talking about. And there is a timeline for the Sustainable Development Goals because it's an action for the next 15 years, started in 2016. And therefore, we have 10 years to go and add and help the Sustainable Development Goals. If you see the UN goals have 4 priorities: the people, planet, prosperity, and partnership. Actually, they have 4 Ps. RDA has 3 Ps for the future, but not the same one. And the 17 goals and the 169 indicators, they all require the big data management tools, and therefore, and operation, both the RDA work and RDA business, is a huge added value to help organizations to achieve their goals once we make it visible. So I just here mentioned the goals. Of course, the members of the intergroup probably are familiar with it, and we will discuss it many times in the future. So I do not wish to spend time here, only to show, to remind us as a flash our memories. And then the RDA strategy and the SDGs. So RDA strategy is under preparation by the Council. We just had a Council meeting, and we are going now with the document as we agreed so far for the community consultation after the plenary, and it will run until the end of the month. Once it will be approved by the community, we start the implementation of the strategy. We will align the strategy and the RDA resources, and then it will be the way when we start to deploy the strategy. We already kind of doing that because our RDA plenaries choose the theme to cover at least one SDG, and we have a keynote speeches during the week. It's true also for this plenary. The knowledge ecology has a connotation with the Sustainable Development Goals, and as well the next plenary in Edinburgh with the theme opening data for global challenges. So actually, we started with the plenary to show to the community, to show to those who are coming to our plenaries, and they look our plenaries also in the web platform, that we are working into this direction. It was the first step to do, and we are already doing that. Yeah. So the RDA Council think that it would be very good if we could screen the RDA working groups and the interest groups to identify their connections to the SDGs. Some of them will be connected to one SDG specifically, some of them to more, and some of them maybe for all because they offer generic solutions. So the direct connection, which could be identified, and some SDGs definitely have a direct relation with the single SDG goal within our working groups. So for instance, the agriculture working group definitely has a very direct relation with the zero hunger, or the climate working groups have, of course, a very, very close relation to the climate action. This is something very obvious, but we still do not label our outputs and our work. We do not align them with the SDGs. Then, of course, there are more indirect relation between the working groups. For instance, the chemical data working group, which adds a lot to the chemical sector prosperity, but not directly. It's the sector itself who will generate the prosperity. But the chemical data or the material science data, which provides the research data and help the industry to make a better solution, definitely has a maybe not direct, but more indirect connection with the prosperity, which is the Sustainable Development Goal number 8. And then there are some more abstract, more hidden and more generic working groups or connections with the SDGs. I can mention the Fair Data Maturity Working Group, where I'm the co-chair, and the Fair Data Maturity criteria definitely will support all the big data exchange. The interoperability is the major thing, and therefore the Sustainable Development Goals will all somehow benefit or could benefit from it if they would know it better. So therefore I put here the signal of the all SDGs and not a single one to that line. So the next step for us, we see it, to discuss it with the RDA bodies and then support together the working groups and interest group co-chairs to start the process once the strategy is approved and the implementation plan is agreed. So this is the very concrete plan for the future. The RDA Council strategy on the SDGs suggests maybe thinking also about grouping the level of engagement because many people I discussed the SDGs talk that we can only support the SDGs by helping to create the indicators. And definitely some of the working groups can have a very direct contribution to the 169 indicators, others maybe not. Others maybe have a direct support to the SDGs, but not to the indicators. Maybe we could use the use cases for the working groups which directly add to the SDG goals. So even if the working group is a more general working group, the use cases that they wish to try their work can be very much connected to the data sets, which definitely contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. and the indirect or very abstract support, then maybe we wish to indicate the SDG logo in documents, articles, outputs, that where they can be used, or where they might have to be interesting for the other communities inside and outside of the RDA. And again, choose the use cases on direct SDG goals if possible. If the working group or the interest group has nothing to do with the Sustainable Development Goals, there is no need for action, and that it's not a problem. Yeah, so RDA will never ever measure the working groups that are you doing something for the SDGs or not. If the working group makes a very important job, but it has no connection with the SDGs, it's also fine. It's just about labeling those which really add. So the next step would be to support the existing RDA working groups and interest group, and look the existing outputs and existing documentation, and maybe if we can find a connection, somehow indicate which SDGs they contribute. And then for the ones which do not exist yet, I think it would be wonderful if we could put the SDG criteria for the new groups during their approval, that which SDGs they would contribute and how, if they can give answer, and maybe we can help them to articulate this in the future. So that's the council plan, and the RDA IG interest group on the SDGs should play the role. We very much hope that you will support the council, you will support the secretariat and the chairs to be aware of the SDGs and to be familiar with it, and that we are able sooner or later to speak the language and the vocabulary of the SDGs. I think that would be the next goal. Thanks very much for listening to me, and I'm very happy that my council members are here with me so they can help me to answer any questions. And thanks very much for being here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Edith. So while I switch over and share my screen, feel free to, if there are any questions or anything in the chat, let me know. I'm gonna switch over here, start presenting. Okay, so everybody can see my slides? Yep. So
just sorry, Francoise has her hand up. Did you have some brief Q&A to Edith?
Absolutely.
Yes, it's just to make completely sure I understand. You were saying that you want to add something about, are you linked somehow with the SDGs in the case statements of the groups, of the new groups? And I really hope, as you say, that the tab will not be, nor the council will be expected to use that to judge the group, but it's rather to gather information from an early stage and to make people think about it early. So as you said, I hope it's not a criterion to judge anything.
Absolutely, yeah. So the goal is, the goal is not judging anyone, and the goal is not evaluating. Yeah, it can be that the working group has nothing to do with the SDGs and it's still a wonderful working group. I think it has to be well understood. What we wish to do, that the working groups which do something for the SDGs are seen for the audience, being it's an RDA internal or being it's an RDA external audience, that we do something with the SDGs, because we do a lot, but we do not label it, and therefore nobody knows it except they really understand the work of the RDA deeply. Yeah, so absolutely sure, no judging. It's not a quality measurement of any of the working group. I hope it's very clear. It's about increased awareness, and consider in your mindset the SDGs that you might have to add something to them, and therefore it's an added value if you do. In that sense that, it's good to have them show to the people, to the community. With no judgment, no, not at all.
Yeah. Any more questions or anything at this point. I'm going to give kind of an overview about some of those abstract connections surrounding how the RDA outputs and recommendations and aligned activities can support some of the underlying UN infrastructure that's necessary to meet the data needs to achieve the SDGs, and some of the interoperability and data management issues, as well as provide some of those direct contributions that align with the SDG goals themselves. You've heard already about the kind of 17 goals at the broad level, and I think most of you are aware of those. But really what I want to focus on is some of the underlying issues surrounding measuring and monitoring the SDGs. So those 169 targets and 232 indicators are categorized by 3 tiers. Tier 1 are captured by at least 50% of nations providing data and have reliable, interoperable standards and methodology for collecting the data and sharing the data. Tier 2 have conceptually clear indicators and internationally established methodology and standards, yet aren't provided by at least 50% of the nations that are providing SDG data. So there's a lack of available data, though a clear methodology and standard for how to provide it. Whereas tier 3 have no existing metadata or ontology standard. They're usually not collected by most nations, and there's not a clear methodology for even beginning capturing those. So the IEA DG from the SDG group stated that 40% of the selected indicators could be classified as tier 1, and 27% of the indicators can be classified as tier 3. So this provides a very clear window of what some of those data challenges exist in meeting those ontology and data standards. The SDG interface ontology and the SDG global indicator framework have led the charge in defining the indicator semantics, though implementing these standards at each national statistical office requires immense effort and provides a clear window wherein RDA could provide support. So this kind of provides a visual overview of how both this data is provided. So you have a managing nation, a statistical office and an organization, sometimes a third-party organization, that are providing those data and populate the indicator data source. And then that then is mapped onto that SDG global indicator framework or ontology, which then allows for measuring and monitoring the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Here we could see direct alignment of multiple different working groups and interest groups, such as the climate and agricultural data to the health data interest group to on and on. But then those underlying infrastructure needs for how this data is captured, collected, standardized, and how those statistics can be fair and reproducible. There's really major challenges that are being addressed across the UN that they still have gaps in how they can meet these needs, wherein I think multiple different RDA outputs, recommendations, or affiliate organizations, as well as interest groups and working groups that could partner with these organizations, could meet the challenges to address these underlying infrastructural needs. So I want to kind of provide some real brief overview of some proposed solutions. And to aid in the understanding of this, I'm going to leverage the Berkman-Klein data commons model and the 6 categories there, because it both allows for clarification of some of the kind of underlying machine actionability, ontology and data formatting, and technical infrastructure, as well as discussion of a lot of the human needs and institutional policies that are necessary to achieve those as well. So you have both, as the RDA mission is very clear, you have the social and the technical meeting within this same program model. So let's begin first with humans. So in order to build the capacity to manage the SDG data at the regional and local level, education and career training is crucial for ensuring the capacity of the national statistical offices. Curricula and spaces, both online and physical, especially in the current pandemic, having access to online education ought to be dedicated to promoting knowledge sharing within and across teams. Ideally, barriers to accessing education resources should be as limited as possible, with cultural competency paid to representing all stakeholder needs and pedagogical values. So you need a lot of cultural competency in thinking about what each nation or what each stakeholder group might need within those national statistical offices. The CoData and RDA data science summer schools provide a standardized community-driven curricula and also have many lessons learned in how to deploy international data science education, particularly targeting the LMICs. But then here we can see multiple different RDA interest groups and working groups that could really operationalize how to meet those human capacity development needs, from the cookbook for engaging researchers in data management to guides for library science and quick tips for finding research data that could meet multiple different stakeholders and multiple different audiences. So again, I'm going to kind of breeze through these pretty quickly, but again, I think this try to get discussion moving here, as well as meeting kind of national and international reports such as the OECD and NSF that have noted the real need for meeting the future workforce and building the digital workforce both now and in the future. So as we move into institutional laws and policies, the role of international research ethics, law, and policy must expand to cover the methods, materials, risk, and responsibility associated with the stewardship of research data across political and geographical boundaries. While we have clear international research methods and research ethics, it hasn't quite reached to addressing the ethics surrounding data use, and there isn't necessarily a lot of international agreement there. So we need to really consider two major questions here. What are the data laws aiming to prevent and protect? And are all parties' epistemic, cultural, and research values equally represented and protected in definition of ethical and legal principles? Particularly in line with the SDGs, they've noted multiple issues surrounding data ownership, licensing, and control, which ought to be considered, and multiple different RDA activities could be of importance for these needs. I'm certain most of you have already considered and thought about and thinking about legal challenges. The CoData RDA legal interoperability of research data working group has produced 6 very easy to understand high-level principles for how to achieve interoperability and licensing of data across nations and across political and geographical boundaries. But when you start thinking about indigenous populations and how to respect and protect the rights and human rights of at-risk populations, the care principles and the newly released trust principles ought to also be considered, and I think could highly inform the overarching theory and policy that many of these statistical offices in the UN are facing, and how to manage and legally protect SDG data as it's coming from multiple different nations and being aggregated into these statistics. But then also, how do we make those legal principles machine actionable and findable? The DMP Common Standard could provide a technology for making both the legal principles more transparent and findable, and make them documented so that it's on paper, it's in machine readable format, it's linked to that data, and it's also linked to the data management plan. So it's not just sitting in a drawer somewhere. Again, multiple different outputs and multiple different strategies within the RDA could align with this, but I think the most important one is that one major impact of the RDA is the capability to convene stakeholders across the scientific landscape to define and inform systems of accountability, as well as what we ought to think about within data ethics, data protections, and data law as we're entering into this new international sharing, as we're facing new and evolving challenges within big data and sharing of data across political and geographical boundaries. In line with the overarching goal of 17 of building organizational partnerships, the RDA has a long-standing history of successful, mutually beneficial, and collaborative partnerships wherein external organizations develop an interest group or working group to support a project aligning with the RDA's mission and vision. For instance, here you can see multiple that have come from WDS to TADWIG to CoData to Force 11. We also have W3C and a number of different organizations that have partnered with the RDA to both align their mission and vision, produce something that's mutually beneficial for both parties. And really, a lot of these lessons learned can go to inform that, overarching goal 17 of how do you build international partnerships with kind of data at the core and ethics at the core and fair and open science at the core. So I think joining, for instance, participating in OAB or TAB or Secretariat, and really having members of the UN or having members from those national statistical offices engaging with Council, TAB, other organizational bodies, or directly participating in a joint interest or working group could be a great benefit to informing the underlying organizational infrastructure of the UN and how they're managing the SDGs, but then also attending plenaries and implementing some of the lessons learned from these past and highly successful organizational partnerships could also be of value, and how to make sure that those lessons learned can be kind of marketed and communicated to organizations that are working on the SDGs, so that you can prevent some of the underlying issues of exploiting data or for-profit organizations trying to profit off of SDG data, as opposed to really focused on the real ideal goal of supporting human capacity development and global development. Formats and labels, these are the bread and butter of RDA. As many of the SDG indicators are lacking appropriate metadata and ontology standards, we ought to limit the social and political barriers to participating in developing, testing, or implementing a standard. So as the SDG indicator ontology and SDG global indicator framework is continuing to evolve, and some of those tier 3 indicators are moving to tier 2 and tier 1, we need to make sure that we're representing all of the nation's needs and we're representing all of their epistemic values and how we're defining those formats and labels. So how could the RDA provide a space to both develop and test those standards, as well as use the existing appropriate standards and support easy implementation for multiple different nations and national statistical offices that are managing that SDG data? For instance, highly aligned with the needs for agricultural and climate development. Multiple people in the agricultural community have really benefited from the wheat and rice data interoperability and agri-semantics development of ontologies there. How else could we learn from these past successes to inform other indicators that are still at that tier 2 or tier 3 level, and start to move towards filling out that full global indicator framework? So it's both defining the appropriate ontologies and metadata. So for those tier 3 and tier 2 where they don't have an interoperable and international standard, how can we leverage what already exists, or provide a space where you can start defining those, as well as how can we provide tools and resources and guidance to aid in multiple different people that are and stakeholders that are managing the SDG data to implement those standards within their own data work. So it's both, it's a both and here. So both sides of how do we define them, and also how do we guide people in using our own resources to implement them. Now, as the kind of heart of the matter, we need to think about the data itself. And Edith, I'm glad you mentioned the fair data maturity model, because that's certainly going to be something that I think we should really think about, because the protocols for ensuring the fairness of the data from all sectors, providing data and statistics for the SDGs, ought to be agreed upon and implemented. So there are the UN standards for statistical offices, and they're building those workflows for management of the SDG data, but there's still a lot of struggles in how to assess the fairness of data coming from multiple different regions, and how to make sure that we're implementing standard protocols across those different regions. So for instance, how could the fair data maturity model provide some guidance and provide a resource for those data flows to both assess the gaps in their own fairness and implement some standards for measuring fairness within their own work. In addition, at kind of the technological level, how could the scalable dynamic data citation principles provide some repository resources to shore up both the reproducibility and the version control of data when it's provided by either a third party or a national statistical office, transfer it over and make sure that when you're aggregating those SDGs statistics and aggregating the indicators, how do you make sure that you're using both the correct version of data and a reproducible workflow for how those statistics are being developed. Again, very, very brief overview, but I think there's multiple different resources that could inform the alignment of data quality, data stewardship, and both looking at how data is stored and queried across those different regions. And finally, looking at technological infrastructure, those same power dynamics and biases which prioritize Western ontologies can also prioritize certain technologies, licensing structures, or models for distributing ownership and access to underlying project infrastructure. So how could we both make sure that we're providing equal access to technological infrastructure and also being aware of certain needs to address internet capabilities and rights managements, or where there might be some existing, some gaps to fill in shoring up technological infrastructure across different regions and LMICs, as well as how do we ensure all the data across these underlying infrastructures are being managed in a middle layer to ensure access or linkage and reliable use across. So, for instance, could the PID kernel information and some of the kind of metadata within the PID kernel be of use in labeling some of the data that's being exported and then used to aggregate the SDG statistics? Or could the data foundation terminology be used within evolving repositories to ensure that we're using a common data, they're using a common data model in their mapping and sharing of data across these different infrastructures? Multiple different other ways and outputs that could be of use here, from DDRI to DFT, PID kernel, and there's a lot of test cases as well. So much to consider as well. So I hope that provided a brief overview of thinking about how some of the underlying issues of managing and producing the SDGs directly align with multiple different RDA activities already, as well as some of the evolving activities that are ongoing within the RDA. And there's really actionable items that we could pick up right now and use to inform some of the activities within the national statistical offices and groups that are managing the SDGs. I think there's multiple different kind of low-hanging fruits and things that we can be active on right now. I also want to shout out some of this work was informed by a previous workshop from the International Network of Networks, and I want to acknowledge co-authors there and reference that grant. And then also, please, if you'd like to join the group and learn more, don't hesitate. So thank you all. I will go ahead and stop sharing. And then, so I think Ingvild, you'll.
Yeah, I can share my screen. I just thought if there are some very brief Q&As while I'm sharing my screen, trying to share my screen.
Yes.
Yeah, Anthony, thank you for this. This is Bob. I guess what I'm looking for is something that perhaps comes out at a higher level.
Okay.
You know, what you've done, I think, is very good, and so don't take this the wrong way. But I'm trying to think of things where, say, a working group output or an interest group activity could just speak at almost like at a political level. Kind of getting back to Edith's presentation, can we actually come up with things where an RDA output, for example, leads to a real success story around one of the SDGs? And by that, I'm saying because of an RDA outcome, these data from organization A were able to be combined with data from organization B to determine something that wasn't previously known.
Mhm.
So I think that's the sort of thing that will get not only political attention, but also funding body attention. So hopefully we can just take the argument up a little bit higher and come up with some of those kind of success stories or potential success stories.
That makes a lot of sense.
I fully agree with Bob. I think that if we get a good case study, but then we need to talk to the coaches. Yeah, I think that we have to increase the awareness of the coaches, and then we probably have already the story which would fit. Yeah, but we do not know the story because the people who has the story do not know the SDGs. Yeah,
And that is a wonderful transition to what I'm going to talk about, because I think we actually do. First of all, do you hear me okay? And are you able to see some, well, my slides?
Mhm.
Well, great. Because I think actually the RDA has a lot of stories to tell with regard to the SDGs, which is why I have been so dedicated towards working in this field ever since I started the group Data for Development, which was before even the SDGs were implemented by the United Nations in 2015. But I do think it's a challenge, actually, both to align a lot of the work going on, also from the technical, but to the contents aspect within the RDA. It will need some effort, both because of the awareness building and because many may work on the SDGs without knowing precisely that they're doing it. And the other is, what kind of stories should we focus on that really makes the case towards big actors such as the United Nations? So, and I think these are decisions that need some of the preliminary mapping where we can see what we've already got, because we do have a lot, as we know, and Anthony and also you, Edith, pointed that we have actually a lot of work that has been happening and going on in relation to the SDGs before we implemented this interest group and also before we got here. So now I will try. So now I hope you see the slide general aims of the interest groups. This is, I will just say some brief information regarding this for those that attend that are not aware of it, but it's all also on our site and internet site. So one of the basic ideas of this interest group RDA for the SDGs is actually also what was just mentioned, to see how the RDA outputs and recommendations within the social and so content related, but also technical work surrounding the sustainable development goals can actually be used to inform or support other work going on within the United Nations, also with returns to advocacy and other fields. This may be because in the meantime, since we actually started working and collecting all the ideas about how the RDA can contribute to big organizations such as, well, the EU, but also the UN, a lot of the data collection, a lot of the information and material has progressed significantly. So in this respect, it would really also be a question of where do we find exactly the slot where we as an RDA can contribute. And I clearly see working myself both internationally and interdisciplinary and cross sectors, that what is so unique within the RDA is that we do have the access to all these groups in one organizations that represent this broad diversity. So that would be one of the aims. The other one is to actually then reach out and see how we can line up with partners and NGOs on a much larger and a much bigger organized setting, to actually see how we may get other organizations on board. This is one of the tasks I've been trying to do and develop during my past year as RDA Europe ambassador for the SDGs, because it turns out that there are many organizations out there working both nationally and internationally targeted towards the SDGs that are not aware of the RDA or that it exists. And that is something, so, and because we are so broad and we're so many members now, 11,000 I read on the homepage. The question is, how can we use all those 11,000 members to again get more of the partnerships and organizations on board that may be needed in the context. I don't know if anybody has ever kind of really tried to map the much broader network that is actually represented within the network of the RDA, which goes far beyond what we usually meet in our and see in our plenaries, because I think that's a sub-interest group of people that active. And then also broaden the collaborative partnerships, in particular in low and middle income countries, also with progressing RDA's mission. And I hope Norman will be able to give his presentation later on how we have tried that within a small bottom-up approach, but we've been pretty successful in getting some of the collaboration going on in some sub-African countries. Now, moving on to that, and I will speed up because I see that actually time is moving quickly. Anthony already mentioned this. This is alignments already happening with various organizations and missions and incentives within the RDA, both partly directed towards the SDGs, but also just in more general terms, so I can disrupt that. The same thing with the partnership. What I would like to focus on is a little bit about what I've already mentioned. So at the presentation in Helsinki, we had already looked specifically at some of the topics on the SDGs, such as no poverty, equality, and we had tried to start a mapping and of an alignment of the various interest and working groups of the SDGs. It was presented in our session and also in the adoption session. The link is here. I will be happy to share the slides. I even think the slides will be on our page after this plenary. So I will not need to go into detail here because everybody can look it up. What we then try to do is what Edith mentioned, to reach out to, first of all the groups that we as co-chairs had access to in the first step. Before, when we were organizing this session for the plenary, we sent out a survey asking the following questions, so basic information on professional background, affiliations and activities in the RDA, and the alignment of the interest groups and working groups activities with the UN Sustainable Development Goals that these who answered the survey responded to, and additional organizations within or outside the RDA they also thought would be crucial for informing and supporting the interest groups activities, and last but not least, the value of the RDA for the supporting the SDGs. And just to give you some basic feedback to some of the questions was, for example, with regard to the question 2 and 3, it became pretty obvious that some of the group members or the respondents represented one discipline, but others and very many were also at home in several cross-cutting disciplines, which somehow are interconnected, but not always directly interconnected from the point of view that we would consider. So covering everything from education, bioinformatics, environmental sciences, data science, gender, climate, health, development studies. And also there were many organizations and partnerships, both that these respondents were working with, but also mentioning that should be, and there were mentioned specific national and disciplinary networks that they were members of or thought would be relevant to have on board in future work within the RDA, which also overlaps pretty much with our preliminary understanding that there is a lot out there within the RDA community. And then there were many with regard to the question of how RDA could contribute. It was everything from the data collection, but also what Anthony mentioned with regard to the more technological aspects, but also providing training in every kind of methods, but also in data management, and also providing recommendations and guidelines which could be of relevance to the international community, to important actors such as the UN or the various agencies of the UN, sub-agencies that are collecting data. I think myself, if I may say, an input from my own research field is that one thing is actually the aspect of the statistical data that many offices collect in measuring the indicators and trying to evaluate how well we have managed by 2030 to actually fulfill the SDGs. But within my field, there's a lot of data collected, which is highly relevant to the SDGs, of different kinds of qualitative and quantitative data that also are of high importance to fulfilling the SDGs that are not necessarily caught by the respective statistical data. So I think sometimes it's also important to look at this differentiation between the different kinds of data we're dealing with. So the next steps will then be what Edith mentioned, is to actually, first of all, to look at, and I will wrap up with that, to reach out, well, first of all, to redefine the questionnaire that we have sent out once and send it out to the working group and interest group chairs following this plenary, but in cooperation now with the working group that we're going to set up that will work on the SDGs with the council, which I think is a wonderful, when I heard that this will be one of the future tasks. And to set up a strategy of priorities, because I think that's would also be necessary to first map and find out how do we get the feedback from the working and interest groups chairs on what they think is going on in relation to alignment of the RDAs with the SDGs. And then from there on, also include in the case statements within the new groups applying how they see their cooperation with the SDGs, because that makes the mapping much easier than if you have to do it post acceptance, and then see how we may find and detect clear areas where we can sell the RDA work and the competence with regard to the SDGs, because I think that we will get a very clear vision. I have some hypotheses in which direction it can go, but I would like to have the databases first. And with this, I will stop and just invite everybody to sign up to our interest group.
So, Francois, I see a hand. Facile,
Yes.
Facile, we'll get you transferred over so you can share your screen as well. But go ahead, Francois.
Yes, thank you very much, Ingrid. It was very clear. I think that I go back to asking people to write something in the case statements. I think that if, we don't want to add too much to the work of the chairs, because the volunteer organization and so on. So I think that you will get, from this exercise, you will have to provide guidance to the chairs beforehand, to tell them what you expect to get from them. And I really hope you will not ask them to dig too deeply and to think too deeply, because otherwise they can be totally discouraged from the start. So I think that if you begin, I think you have to provide a guidance which will be well fit for purpose, and not to want, if you want to be totally exhaustive, I think we may even lose working groups and interest group proposals.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for feedback. I'll be happy to, to share and discuss this with and get the opinion and feedback back from many of you that are involved before we do that. I see the point.
Yes. I would say that if there is a change in the case statements for the groups, this has to be discussed with TAB. Yeah. And I will not be in TAB for very soon, but I'm glad to discuss this with you when you begin to work on that. So you can tick me as a volunteer for that.
Thank you. Any others before we move on? I guess we should just move on quickly. We have a still long agenda.
Good evening. Can I start now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I'm coming from different area from the others. So My name is Faisal Muhammad Faralmula. My background in genomic bioinformatics and information technology. I, I established Center for Bioinformatics and System Biology with the funding from NIH, National Institute of Health from USA in 2012. And that grant was up to 2017 and then extended to 2022. So I'm going to give just an overview. So this is the 17 sustainable development goals. And I think from my background on H3 Bionet, that is the Pan-African Bioinformatics Network, where I represent in University of Khartoum in Sudan. So we are mainly in goal 3, 4, education, and because genomic medicine is related to health, and as we will see later, in my country, number 5, there is equality because the Minister of Higher Education is female professor, the Vice Chancellor of our university is female, so we don't have problem that maybe in the government, but not in the education. So background, we all know there is advanced genomic in genomic and molecular biology and next generation sequencing, and that use computer super powers, but that is limited to the developed country. Africa, that is still before 2012, before the NIH grant, that is, the situation is not like that. But luckily, with the NIH grant, we established the Pan-African Bioinformatics Network, which is about 20, it used to be 32 network in Africa with one node from Illinois University in USA. And mainly we develop courses for African introduction to bioinformatics in all nodes. It's a kind of not face to face, but the instructor record the lesson and then share it with others across Africa video conference. And then there is a teaching assistant in the class. They run the video, and then after 2 hours, the instructor will come online, and then if the participant have question, then they can answer it. So we have also we start in 2016 introduction to genomic medicine for nurse in Africa. We plan it for all health professionals, but we say let us start with the nurse, and later on we can upgrade it. So that was run from 2017 to 20, and also to 2019. And also we start intermediate course for microbiome data analysis last year and this year. And this year, both the IBT and the intermediate was online due to pandemic. So this is a kind of model blend local face-to-face with the student have to report to local centers, and then they have to upload their assignment. So as I mentioned, the goal 3 of the development goals is that good health and well-being, and I don't need to repeat what others said about this, but the role of the H3 Bionet and my node in Sudan is training nurse and health professional on genomic medicine, microbiome data analysis, and bioinformatic data analysis. And on the term of goal 4, quality education, again, I'm not going to go, we know that it has 7 targets and 3 means of implementation. So from education point of view, we are in target 4.3, 4.4, because we are tertiary education, high education, and we help in skill for work. That means bachelor graduate or master graduate, when they come to our course 3 months, after it will help them in finding a master locally or abroad. And the means of implementation is education facility, bioinformatic lab, and learning environment, scholarship. Yesterday I was involved with applying for 2 of my female students. So my lab is 10 individuals, including me, and we are only 2 men, and the rest are females. So because that is the scale in the country, even the university, more than 60-65% is female wise. Okay, So the local setting that the university provide me with bioinformatics laboratory with 25 PC and space for the laptop. I have from the grant of the NIH server based at the network. I have teaching assistant from those who take the course in the previous year. I'm the principal investigator. Also, I'm responsible for this class. We start in 2016 with one class in the main campus. Then I extended to the medical campus, agriculture, agriculture campus, and then the laboratory medicine because those people are involved in genetic and genomic and molecular diagnostic. They need to be updated on the new technology. Yeah. And then we have remote assistance from the IBT core at the University of Cape Town. So this is just we published a paper on 2017. From the start, we agree that we give the students survey at the beginning to see their background in bioinformatics, then in the middle of the course, and then at the end, and then after 1 year to see if that course helped them in finding a new job, finding a scholarship locally or abroad, something like that. But we get to know that the majority of those who apply to the course are coming from the University of Khartoum. So in the upcoming year, we start to uh, increase, promote for the course for other university and other state within the Sudan. So this is when the course starts. We have the survey S in the middle and at the end, and then we can see the one here is the holy month of Ramadan. It starts 2 weeks from the start and then end in the middle, and then we found that there is a drop. This is the modules, database, Linux, pairwise alignment, sequence alignment, genomic, phylogenetic. So most of them, the biomedical and biology background. So when it came to Linux, because it's computer science, we start to see drop in attendance, and then the withdrawal pattern start to increase. So that is thing we have to address later on in the upcoming year. Also, this is showing the Universal Khartoum not taken after 1 year. Yeah. So we will see that after 1 year, we send them email asking them. They were about 73. 70 they passed the course series they didn't because they didn't attend all the or uh, uh, solve the assignment and they have to upgrade it, upload it to the server in UCT for marking. So we can see that junior staff they benefit from the course because after 1 year that course helps them in finding a job or finding a scholarship. But the senior staff there is no change. So that's a good thing if you can see that the junior staff uh, they are in their early career, the course helps them. That is a plus. Another thing also in 2016 we have a meeting of SDGs Africa in Senegal, Dakar. We agreed that we have also to have a course in genomic medicine, for as I mentioned, and then we start that course uh, in 2017. But this is the situation before the HCD Africa, the USA grant, NIH. There is limited resource to sequence for human genome. There is lack of access to next generation technology, policies that are silent on genetic and genomic because of the cultural base, different ethnic, different people. They look for the new technology differently, limited utility of genomic. And then we start with African genomic, as I mentioned, 2016, and we have the vision of increasing effectiveness of healthcare in Africa through application of genomic medicine. We can't left behind with this technology. And then the mission is design and develop genomic medicine training for African-based healthcare professionals, economic medicine curriculum for healthcare, and develop and implement training courses based on the developed curriculum. So the course run also on the video conference in 2017. We have one class in our university, and then also we have about 15 nurses. One of them finished the course, and now she's doing her master in University of Glasgow in England. So that the research for the nurse in biomedical, we start with the nurse because we have the idea that the doctor are busy let us start with the nurse because they spend most of the time near the patient and they are the one who link between the doctor and the lab, test over these things, and then later on we will have the course with for others, doctors, pharmacists, and laboratory and pathologists. The overall objective is that develop and implement plan of care for patients that incorporate genetic genomic knowledge. Nurses need to know the new technology in Africa too. So that is one of the issue of training. Also from 2015, I was the head of research working group, and we plan to have monthly webinar that start from May 2015 until today. Every month we have a webinar, and then after 2 years, we draft it in a publication and send it to PLOS Computation Biology for training, and then they say, oh, this is fit in the 10 simple rules. Can you change it from article to 10 simple rules? Okay, we change it, and that is the 10 simple rules for anybody you want to deliver webinar series. And nowadays, even with COVID-19, that is will be also an asset. So rule one, and then this is the reference. I'm not going to go over this, but this is something that came out, and we are happy that I was the head of the research working group. Now one of my students, she moderated the webinar until she left last year for finishing for her PhD in New Zealand. So here we have just a webinar planning flow chart that we start for next year. We start from December, that we have for 12 months or 11 months. We have a theme for every month: big data, data analysis, data, health data, genomic analysis, etc. We specify the theme, and then we select who is the expertise that we are going to contact. If you contact him, if he say busy, then we go back to our database and see who is the next. And then we start asking him for the talk title, abstract, and consent form, because we are recording the video, and all of them now in the YouTube of HCD Bionet channel of YouTube. And then after that, we will have text the webinar with the presenter, and then create a webinar announce, and then delivering the webinar on the day of the talk. Usually the last Wednesday of the month. And this is just showing the demographic distribution of HCD seminar presenter. As you see, most of them are from USA, from Europe, North Africa, and a few of them from Africa, and one of them from Australia. So also I was involved co-lead data management plan project within HCD Bionet. So our project mainly objective is to train Africa research on how to create effective data management plan, and also to meet the requirement of selected funding agency, as well as to be aligned on their own institution guideline and policy. And up to now, in May 2016, we delivered training for about 27 HCD Africa data managers on how to develop an effective data management plan. In November, we will have financial support for Mozilla, HCD Bionet, and we have a tour in East Africa. We train in open science. It was open science tour, but included data management plan and fairness, fair principle. We train about 25 from Uganda, 25 from Ethiopia, 25 from Sudan, 25 from Kenya. In last September, there is HCD Bionet meeting. It is visual one because of the pandemic. I trained a data manager about around 27 on the best practice of developing data management. I give them a lecture for 1 hour, and then the next other day I will give them a case study, and then try to give them time, 45 minutes, and then we came back again, meet, and then I discuss with them where is the weakness and strength of their data management plan, and then give them insight. And then at the end of the training, I give them the work example about that case study. Conclusion, I have to say that education and training is a human right and a force for sustainable development and peace. every goal in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development requires education to empower people with the knowledge, skill, and value to live with dignity, build their life, contribute to their society. And I would like to acknowledge the University of Khartoum, mainly Faculty of Science, Management, and SCC BINET, and NIH for the grant from the Office Director, in spite of the sanctions against Sudan, and RDA for the citation. Thank you.
Thank you, Fasil. Thank you so much. So I want to be aware of time and make sure that we can get to all the speakers. So maybe we can hold questions, and then Allison, if you're ready. But if there's a brief question while we transition or transfer over.
I'd like to ask if this process is moving to other universities in Sudan and in Africa. Do you export this method to other countries?
Yeah, I think the network is about 27, and right now we are working on a new grant for data science initiative in Africa, because that is the NIH gives us 5 years from 2012 to 17, and then renew it for another 5 years, and that is the thing. We have to apply for another grant. So we are approaching with Eritrea, Ethiopia, South Sudan, and even within different states within university. We start with one class, as I say, and then we extend it to other campus because we are in the main campus. And then the medical campus also, they need genomics, the nurse and the pharmacy and School of Medicine, and then the agriculture and veterinary, and then the laboratory medicine pathology. So I extend that, so we have 4 or 5 classes. And next we're going to establish national bioinformatics network within Sudan and East Africa. I hope I answered.
Yes, thank you.
I'll turn on my microphone. I am ready whenever you are. So let me know. I've just got to, there.
Yeah, I think to Lindsay's point, feel free questions in the chat, but go ahead, Allison. Thank you.
Okay, yes, I'll just make sure I am sharing the correct screen. Good. Okay, that was what I was trying to do, and let's hope we can share it in this format. Can you see that, or can you see me? Can you see my screen?
Yes, we do.
Oh, excellent. That's great. Yes, I had to turn off another screen if you saw me ducking and diving. My talk is not tremendously sophisticated. I'm not quite sure why, but anyway, let's hope it is useful. I suppose one of my challenges has been that, and I echo some of the previous talks, that the Sustainable Development Goals affect almost everything, and they're so broad and overarching. You know, you have to actually engage in a useful way is actually more the challenge than saying, well, how do we relate to them? Because I think almost everything relates to the Sustainable Development Goals in some way, and that was their intention. So in order to be more focused and targeted, I have to think a bit about it. Now I'm going to talk because I'm an environmental scientist and an ecosystem scientist, and I think by basic training, and I think the best thing I thought about all these other SDGs that affect an environmental scientist, education, health, or that the environment affects in the well-being of human health, for example, it was a bit broad. So I've just focused on SDGs 14 and 15, which are very much the ecosystem services approach, conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas and marine resources for sustainable development, and to protect, restore and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems. So we've got the two components. They're pretty well identical with some nuances according to the habitat in which you're looking, terrestrial or marine. And we'll see if I can advance. There we go. So I'm just to highlight some of the range of activities. We're particularly talking about any activity that humans have interfaced with in order to sustain themselves over millennia. And of course, the present day effects where we are beginning to have biodiversity. We've been beginning for a couple of centuries to really talk about biodiversity conservation for its own sake, but the 20th century was really where that started. So, you know, the big debates on forests and sustainably managing forests, stopping logging, I don't know where you get your building material from, combating desertification. These two photographs here are from Xinjiang province in China, which I was very privileged to visit. This is natural stuff, but in the Inner Mongolian and other sorts of plateaus, and in Africa, of course, desertification stimulated by humans is pretty major. And so that's got in there. And land degradation is very common with overuse of fertilizer and cultivation and that sort of thing. So, you know, this is this tension between biodiversity and human activity. So that's the basis. They've got, as you have seen, many, many indicators. It is absolutely daunting how many things people, the United Nations and these agreements are trying to measure. And the mind actually boggles about the capacity of some of the countries and suppliers to measure this. Some countries like Australia, from whence I come, you know, have taken this pretty seriously, but may I say, we haven't agreed to everything, as you will see, and partly that is because of the labour and discipline involved in actually reporting on some of these criteria in a sequential and longitudinal manner. So, you know, I think from that point of view, it is all about the data. There are some simple sorts of data, which is legislative. Is that simple? I think we might have an argument about that. But yes, these are periodic reviews of legislative, administrative and policy frameworks that have been put in place in the different countries of the globe to meet some of these conventions. And we're not just talking SDGs, and I've probably got my parentheses in the wrong place, in one place I have, but things like the Nagoya Protocol and the Convention on Biodiversity. These are all there. It isn't just the SDGs. There are some real subset or parallel definitions that are really important as well. And of course, the most recent SDGs have really brought in this focus on economic and social development and how that is married with the biodiversity conservation. So the big trick is how to measure them. But just to show you a little pretty picture, seeing I had a very simple set of slides, having been drowned in the diversity for a while, can't see the forest for the trees is a common saying. So the HE biodiversity targets, just to bring that to the fore, they are directed directly at biodiversity, obviously, and I won't read those out for you because we do need to talk about some of these things, but just to bring them into your mind's eye. And of course, Nagoya Protocol, which has particularly come up, and we've got a couple of instances of discussions in this RDA meeting about Indigenous interests. And Australia is not a signatory to the Nagoya Protocol. I did mention that we weren't a signatory to everything. So that's a first world sort of country. We're not quite sure that we are, but that's a first world country that has stepped out. And so when we talk about inclusiveness, it's a bit of a struggle if we're finding it something that we are not entirely comfortable with. we can't all meet some of these, every country in the world can't all meet this exercise, but this has particularly come up as terribly important and presages some potential heritage ownership, not just about genetic resources, but about lots of other things that goes against global partnerships and open data across the globe when you are talking about natural heritage, patrimoine, as Françoise would be familiar with. So, okay, so what can the RDA do? So I think a couple of people have commented upon talking about the organisations who are doing it. So we've got these big ideas and they are quite daunting in many ways. And the big organisations are kind of the clearinghouses, I suppose, is one of the ways we could do it, or the repositories, if you like. Coming up in a lot of the actions and the responsible organisations for these things are organisations like the FAO for conservation of animals, such as threatened animals, and crimes, which we hear of all too often, include both death of rare and endangered species. We hear about the rhinos, but also about transport of feral and dangerous species. The UN Office on Drugs and Crime comes into it, and that is something that could be quite important for the RDA. The UN Environmental Conservation Monitoring Centre, and so on. There are other organisations, and I've just mentioned a few there. BirdLife International is directly mentioned, but there are numbers of organisations that hold very important information and that feed, when asked or when not asked, into global decision making. And things like Ramsar, BirdLife International, eBirds, Protected Planet are actually quite important players. And most of these organisations, I should have put the third bullet point second probably, the FAO and UN all obtain information from governments. So a lot of the quality of their information is dependent on the quality of the countries and their capability to supply. And I'll come back to this in a minute. So we've got an example at the moment on the World Database on Protected Areas, and protected areas is really an easy benchmark to measure, because you can do that with remote sensing and with mapping with a satellite. And so a lot of stuff is not hidden these days. And its land area. Doesn't mean that what's in the protected area is any good, and that's the trick. And of course, the trick is that several research infrastructures and organisations, data collection organisations, are going down to the next level. I haven't given numbers to these levels or done a beautiful diagram, but I should. Data collection organisations such as the Long-Term Ecological Research Network, FluxNet, that measures carbon and gaseous atmospheric exchanges in the lower atmosphere, NutNet for nutrient cycling, which becomes very important in some countries, for example, for SDGs. And of course, there are new global integrating initiatives like Future Earth and Belmont. They all contribute at various stages, and by no means are they original. They're morphing from around about the 50s. So there's been an evolution of some information and some of these initiatives over time. Okay, so where can the RDA contribute? So I'm echoing what other people have said, and my apologies for not actioning this diagram, because you've got to read it all at once. Reaching out, and I think interacting with some of those administrating and contributing organisations. So those two levels, some of the administering organisations, such as the UN ones, probably a bit big, but maybe let them know. But some of them I'll mention in a minute, and contributing organisations. And I think, apologies for the word contribute twice in one sentence, and the RDA can work out ways where groups can contribute to the effectiveness of the achievement of these SDG goals. And I think a lot can, because I think the RDA has a lot to contribute, because all of this requires data. It's all about the data and repeated data measurements against benchmarks. Now, you know, repeated is, well, it's kind of easy when you're looking at percentage of land area, which I mentioned for protected areas. But for other things, it's actually very hard and often isn't terribly well proven. I've mentioned some things there: repeat measurements, accessibility of data, coordination of terminology across the globe. That, of course, takes forever, but I think the RDA can help a lot there. And we've talked about ontologies and etc. Now, one of the projects we're doing at the moment, and I did a bit of a study in our first world country to contribute to it for a rather large area of Australia, and 90% of the listed protected areas in one state of Australia, was about nearly a third of it, at the top classification of protected areas. So these should be the best documented by the CAPAD tool that each country uses to contribute to the World Database on Protected Areas. I had to reject 90% of them. And that was of a group only selected for us for temporal analysis. That's a lot. And why was it? Because there was a subtle difference in the pickup of the data that was supplied by the national country to the World Database on Protected Areas. And the World Database on Protected Areas didn't pick up the right information. The information was there, but they did the wrong link. So it actually wasted about 4 days of my time. And less at lower categories, because it was probably less precise in the first place. So that was interesting. And it's only, and I skipped to the third big bullet point there, it's only by using test cases, and so giving a bit of a plug for Parsec, that you can often discover this sort of thing. So this is why this partnership with some of these kind of top and lower, maybe some groups at lower organisations, the contributing organisations can help, and also with having some an engagement with some projects that might be testing some of the key points that RDA might wish to think about contributing to. And I've just got in the middle there, link with discipline organisations such as professional societies. And I hark back to the last speaker, education. This is pseudo-education. Talk about the RDA with them, because they're the people who are actually collecting the data often, and they're the people who know about quality and the quality of data that's going in. So just getting them to understand a bit more about RDA. And one of the disciplines that I think is one of the most useful probably are any spatial disciplines. The remote sensing, GIS, and of course spatial using population demographics, that sort of spatial discipline, spatial view of the world is often one of the most useful integrating component discipline areas. It often is interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary inherently, so that often can be, might be a very good kind of discipline organisation to target. Geographers is of course a very broad classification of that. And that is it. So I will just, so thank you very much, and I will stop sharing. And I hope you enjoyed the pretty pictures at least. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Alison. So everybody, I'm aware of time. We have two very quick, I think very impactful projects to highlight. So if you're willing to stick around, it'd be greatly appreciated. Lindsay's going to go ahead and go next. And so just two quick ones, and then hopefully we can continue the conversation via email and future conversations and everything. So thank you for sticking around.
Great, and can everybody hear me right now? Okay.
Yes.
Great, and yes, do please continue to put chats and questions and stuff in the group chat, because we can have speakers address things after as well. But really quickly, what I wanted to touch on, I'm just sharing my screen here, was actually this is sort of another kernel of something that our interest group has been doing, which is sort of collaborating and thinking about how to connect to other groups and people that are doing work connected to the SDGs. And sort of to Edith's point earlier, there's some interest in working groups within the RDA that have more direct alignment to a particular SDG, and agriculture, the agricultural data interest group is certainly one of those, and one that I've been a member of. And we were also approached by Brian Wee and Bill Tang. Some of you may know they're both affiliated with RDA, but also affiliated with the group ESIP, which is the Earth Science Information Partners, another organization based mostly in the US, but that has a lot of overlap with RDA as well. And so both of them approached us because their group through ESIP, which is their group is called the Agriculture and Climate Cluster. So this is their wiki that hopefully you can see on my screen. Their group has been working, they reached out to the RDA for SDGs interest group because they were really excited because their group has been working on how to connect their clusters activities and focus it more and align it a little bit with the SDGs. So I just wanted to give a quick example, just show their work and kind of give them a shout out and say that this is the kind of collaboration and maybe a way to start thinking about, a different, or one example of a way to connect to the SDGs. So this is, again, their wiki, and then what they have been doing recently has been mapping. So this is a knowledge graph of the work that their group does. So at the top here, the ESIP Agriculture and Climate Cluster, and they've made this knowledge graph of the work that they're doing, and then you can kind of see it filter all the way down to how that even connects to the Sustainable Development Goals. On the bottom there, you can see these sort of different objectives and activities they've been working on and thinking about, with parts such as ontologies, provenance frameworks, machine learning, graphs, and concept maps, and how this is all sort of contributing and focusing on the Sustainable Development Goals that they see their group sort of aligning with. So again, I didn't want to go and take up too much time here, but just to give a quick snapshot of the way a working group that's reached out to the RDA, our RDA interest group, has been thinking about how connecting their activities to the SDGs has looked, and we're really excited to continue to connect and collaborate with them in the future, particularly aiming at their next winter meeting. We'll be doing a little bit more collaborative work. So if anybody's interested, I'd be happy to think about connecting more people. So thank you. And stop share.
Thank you so much, Barb. I love that knowledge graph. So if there aren't questions, maybe Ingo, you can go ahead and speak. Yeah,
I'm working on it.
Yeah, that knowledge graph is just
it's getting late here. So can you see Norman's slides on early career researchers?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Okay, so Norman just wrote me. He apologizes very much. He is stuck at home due to Corona because they're not allowed to leave the house after 9 o'clock. And he has very bad internet connection at home, so he hasn't been able. But he's happy to have me say a couple of words about this. So Norman is also co-chair of Data for Development, and within this we have cooperated on a variety of issues. And one of the things that we think is highly relevant to the SDG 17 on capacity building and partnerships is a summer tool that is my institution, together with my boss Simona Haas, who is also co-chair for Data for Development, have implemented together with Norman in order to expand training in research methods and also data management in Uganda, but also in East Africa. But not only the training, also the capacity building and networking and reaching out to the variety of actors of relevance in the East African area when it comes to data access. So there was one summer school in 2019, and there was another one planned actually now and there was one now taking part in the early 2000s, and then 2020, I mean, and then there was one going to take place now in 2021, but that has been postponed, as you can see, until 2022. And due to Corona, we actually even got some additional funding to set up virtual training sets, and so that this can be used as multiplier effects also for future trainings within the field. So it's funded by the Volkswagen Foundation. So one of the things was that the summer school is the capacity building with the partnerships and also with the data for development at the RDA that we established in 2014, where we tried to expand the partnerships that we now also develop within this external funding opportunity to make them aware of the RDA and thereby also reach out and basically get more organizations and people and individuals interested in the work and knowledge about the work of the RDA in these regional areas. The East African Scientific Research Network now has 14 official institutional members, and there's a link here and that you can look at who's the member when we upload the slides. And the goal is to build and improve the research and technical capacity and basically change the culture towards a more evidence-driven planning and decision-making. And then we're back to, of course, the SDGs, because as been mentioned also by several others and also by Ellison, you need clear measurements, you need not just the indicators, but a possibility to also be sure that we can reach the same results with the various measurements we have. So the future, as I said, is 2022, and also having programs on open data and fair data in research and innovation. In very many academic circles in the East African area, the work of the RDA is not known. The outputs, the recommendations, the adoptions, everything that exists needs to be communicated in a much more efficient and probably also by many more of the people being active. It's the feedback I get from many of the colleagues there. And it's also, so we're focusing on transforming the training virtually, but also how you can push forward the open data and make repositories and soft infrastructure training and development in that area. Having said that, as has been seen tonight, stable infrastructures is also a question of having electricity that allows you to attend these nice virtual seminars, and it's definitely something we should have in our minds in future when we keep on expanding our activities into the virtual room. So thank you, and thank you to Norman.
Yes, and thank you so much, Norman. So I apologize that we've ran over time a little bit, and I would really like to offer the option of maybe we can organize a group call in the coming months. I recognize holidays are coming up and most people are busy, so I could we can continue via email and have a doodle poll of some sort, and maybe we can continue discussion and next steps in planning as we all reflect as the plenary closes and we go to co-chairs meetings and etc. I hope everybody would be willing to participate in that. How does everybody think about that? Okay, so again, apologies for running over, and I really want to thank all of you for attending, and really thank you all for engaging on the SDGs, and thank you to all the speakers and all the great work that everybody's doing. I really think that this is a really important mission and project, and thank you to my fellow co-chairs, and thank you all for attending. And I will thank you all for attending, and I will we can follow up on organizing a group call, and I look forward to hearing from all of you and continuing this discussion. And thank you all. And
Thank you,
and
Anthony. Thank you,
yes,
Anthony.
so everybody's
Thank you.
emails are in the notes. So yeah.
Thanks very much indeed.
Yes.
Bye.
Thanks, Alison, so much.
Everybody.
Oh,
Thank
I
you.
hope so. Thank you. Okay, see you later. Bye.
Thank you all.